What I mean is to discuss along the general questions in your memos are the kinds of things that you wrote about where the solution can be found. And this has to do with learning, reframing, the questions of changing identity, changing oneself, changing the rules of the game structurally. And let me just to begin the discussion to put on the table the question of self-change. And maybe try to get to through this question also to Sari's Archimedean lever and solution. And the question is, if we need to start a process of change, we go back to the question of agency vis-a-vis structure. The question is, we were talking with Jon before, that in a tit-for-tat situation, you need a tit. You need a first step. Someone has to go first. No, I understood immediately what I, what I said and how she reacted.
I was just thinking there are cultural discourses,
right? Right, but I went, after I said it, what should I say? I think that, well, we'll have something to remember. I hope that will be. The question is, and I put that question on the table at the beginning, is not only who should go first, but whether the one that should go first is the most powerful. And the question then is a question about power. Because there are obvious ways of saying that Israel is the most powerful, but there is a trade-off between the present and the future, as Sari said. So in short, the question is, how should we start the process of change? Where should we look for the solution? And finally, and to me it's one of the most important questions on this level, is how to make it practical. How to try to bridge between the high-level academic discussions about rationality, irrationality, framing, and learning, and the nitty-gritty of politics on on the surface. So that's to me a very important question. But let's start with the question of who should go first.
Could I just make a question, I think, on the issue of self-change? I don't quite understand that, because suppose I'm unhappy because I have a very short time horizon, and maybe it gets me into all sorts of trouble. Well, suppose somebody offered me a time discounting pill that gave me a long time horizon. If I'm rational, I'd refuse it, because anything I can do with the pill, I can also do without the pill. If I don't want to defer consumption, then I don't want to take a pill that will make me defer consumption. So it seems to me to want to change, to want to be another kind of person, almost already presupposes that you are that other kind of person you want to be. Otherwise, so it seems to me that there's a bootstrapping problem here. Maybe you can explain it to me.
Okay. Sari, and I will then take the floor to try to explain. Sari. Okay. I think that because identity is a picture of ourselves in terms of others, there is a structure between us and them. And I believe that we need to change the structure. And in order to change the structure, someone has to start. And in order to start, whether it is because of outside constraints, inside constraints, etc., can be demographics, can be other type of pressures. There is enough of one side can change itself in terms of, for example, if you talk about, and I'll talk about Israelis, in terms of the nature of the Jewish state as opposed of the state of the Jews. Symbols that the Jewish state has now. The nature of Zionism that in fact fits the 19th century. In fact, it's an idea that congealed in the 19th century. It has not been updated ever since. Maybe, and here we may disagree with Avishai, but maybe even considering some changes, not certainly abolishing or anything, the law of return. But I'm just mentioning things that we could do to change ourselves in order to show the other side, in fact, that their prevalent image of us could and should change as well. So this is not a change that is supposed just to change, let's say, if it's between you and me, that I'm just trying to change your behavior on a short-term basis. It is, I'm trying to change the structure. So by changing myself, given that identity is as me, you, I bring a change in you and then a change of the structure. That's what I meant. Sorry.
Yeah, I think going along in the same lines, if I may, for example, one can have or define oneself as a Zionist. And if asked what that means, one can give or provide a definition, which might, that particular definition, be totally inconsistent with, contradictory to, the definition or self-definition of a Palestinian as a nationalist. And again, one might redefine Zionism. And by redefining Zionism, therefore find oneself not necessarily in contradiction with somebody defining themselves as a Palestinian nationalist. So the question is, if these instantiations of being a Zionist and a Palestinian nationalist are possible, then the question is there anything that can be done by one side or the other to make that possibility realized? This is basically the, and I think actually it's true not only in politics, it's probably true in relations, husband and wife, lovers, and that's why I mentioned earlier friends and enemies, and why I say that one can actually help in constituting oneself and others. And there's no problem, I think, in thinking, come on, I mean, if we didn't think we could influence or shape our own identities, improve ourselves, we'd lose faith or hope in being alive. It is our hope and faith that we can, in fact, improve on ourselves that allows us to have the impetus, the power to move forward. May I just continue to say something about power? And I'd like to use an anecdote here because it's not my, again, it's not my field, and all my knowledge derives from actual experience, which may only be true with regard to that experience, and therefore, very specific. Now, to go back, I was, as I was trying to get people to support signing that thing I talked about, I used to go to people, to villages and so on, and meet with a lot of activists. And I was telling people, young people, that they should sign on this statement. It's very conciliatory. And they were telling me, what are you talking about? Israeli tanks are entering into our villages, soldiers. Do you want us to greet them with olive branches? If we have rocks, we will use them. If we have guns, we will use them. If we have rockets, we will use them. That's our natural. Why should we use olive branches? And in one such exchange between myself and some activists, I thought of a situation which just occurred to me at the time, and I presented it, and it seemed to work. I said to them, well, suppose two people find themselves entangled into a physical fight. So you're walking in the market. You know somebody bumps against you. You think the other guy has started it. He thinks he started it. You suddenly find yourselves embroiled in a physical fight, and then one of the two of you throws the other one to the floor. So there you are. You have a physical fight. This was a good example because the people I was talking to were used to these kinds of things. So one of you throws the other to the floor, and as they do, they pin them down. So they're pinning them down with both hands and legs, and the guy on the floor is wriggling and screaming and trying to bite and trying to. And then the question is, in such a situation, who has more power? So the two people are embroiled in a fight. They don't know yet why it happened. Actually, in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, most of us aren't really sure why it all happened. But they're embroiled in a fight. One of the two parties has actually put the other down, and they're pinning them down, and they're afraid because the people on top is afraid if they let go, that the guy underneath will start scratching and screaming and kicking and biting. And the question is, in a situation like this, who has more power? And, they think about it a little bit, and, I tell them, I think, actually, paradoxically, in a situation like this, the party that has more power is the party that's floored, not the party that's on top. And the reason is that they have more choice. If you define power by choice, by the number of things that you can do, then it is the party that's floored that actually has more options, because they can stay still and they can wriggle and nothing will change their status. Whereas in the case of the party on top, if they let go, they stand to lose the strategic advantage they already have. So it makes more sense, therefore, for the party that's floored, instead of wriggling and kicking and trying to bite, to lay quiet for a while, look into the eyes of the party that's on top, and ask them, what are you doing here? Why are you lying on top of me? What has placed us in this situation? And then maybe try and influence the other guy, the other party, to get up. Because, in fact, it is a much better, more convenient, natural state of affairs for the two of you to be standing. Now, okay, I want to say very quickly in conclusion that I take this, this is partly, by the way, Gandhian, all of this. But it's also very much derived from stories that I've heard from colleagues, friends, Palestinians who've gone, for instance, in the early 70s through jail. I have a cousin who spent, I think, 17 years in jail. And he used to tell me that one of the things the Israelis used to do to try and, impose power over them was to make them undress in front of each other. So they would be undressed totally. And it occurred to them at one stage, the prisoners, that, this is only really a shaming experience if you think it. If you think it, if you internalize it, if you accept it. But you can likewise reject it. You do not have to define yourself as being shamed or not shamed insofar as you're dressed or undressed. And so very often, in fact, you can...
Now, would you care to continue to say one more sentence? What does it mean in terms of you first?
I should, huh? You think I should? I think I've said enough. It's not clear?
Yeah, I don't how should I put this? I guess in the spirit of being a little bit of a devil's advocate, I wonder if we're not running down a rabbit hole in terms of this question of who should go first. Because, and I just want to sort of, if you will, I'm trying to think of all the different strategies that have been tried over the last several decades. And if I were to be in the catalog of all the different strategies, many of which conform reasonably well to all the kinds of solutions, all the kinds of tactics and strategies that we're quite familiar with.
whining always works for you too.
No whining. All right. Sorry. Just on a comic, well, not comic, humorous note, but your pinning down analogy comes from, it sounds to me like from Isaac Deutscher. About 40 years ago, he wrote something about sort of the tragedy of the Israeli-Palestinian situation being, you know, it's, I think, subconsciously. But coming back to who goes first and so on, I think, well, we've actually had a very recent example of a structure that was proposed and accepted with the reservations by all parties that was designed to resolve this dilemma, the roadmap for all its other faults, and the fact that I think it was still born. Nonetheless, the whole idea was to set up mutual commitments and obligations that were to be launched basically in parallel, simultaneously, never mind various quibbles here and there who was to go first, but fundamentally the idea was both sides had obligations and that was the end of it. And the quartet was to oversee and provide the conditions within which it was possible for both sides to proceed without getting stuck on who goes first and what the preconditions were. Now, we could either look at that and ask why it didn't work, and whether it's because you can't resolve this dilemma, or because in this case it was maybe for all its other faults a roadmap. I think at the time, I mean, I didn't like it too much, but I still thought at least if it actually was implemented, it would go somewhere. Precisely because you sort of suspended this particular problem. I see it very much, though, as an issue to do with practicalities of procedure and, I mean, of pragmatic issues of providing security, who shoots or stops shooting first, settlements, rather than to do with identity and self-change in that manner. And I really think that you can't start with that. I mean, that's something that comes about as a result of conditions you provide or alter, opportunities. You know, if people find that they can get to the things that are important for them in daily life, for instance, or even in symbolic terms, then that may shift their attitudes to issues. And I think where all this is important, just to come back a little bit to this sort of issue of, I mean, recognition, for instance. I mean, it's partly about recognition, as I argued in my memo, that where I think this gets stuck and where it can be unblocked is that a lot of the time these issues of who goes first are partly about status and recognition, in a sense, of obligation at least, if not recognition of status. And that they are important not because of some pure symbolism or some sort of pure psychological factor we all have as human beings, the ego or whatever, but rather because recognition denotes acceptance that you might have specific claims or ideas of how to go about things that are equally valid, at least to be heard and considered, even if not necessarily implemented. So, in other words, the symbolic, or what we regard as things to do with ego and status, are not pure ego and status in some pure abstract manner. They're actually very much about who gets to call the shots, set the rules of the game, establish procedure, and determine what goes on the agenda. And I think there's a lot of room for change. And we have, again, examples, as Mike was suggesting, in the past, not even decades, but just in the last 15 years. We had both the Madrid process, where the Israelis said, we won't talk to East Jerusalemites, we won't talk to diaspora Palestinians, we won't talk to PLO Palestinians, and we'll talk to the rest as part of the Jordanian delegation. And so there was a lot of non-recognition there. And we've tried the opposite, when the two actually talked to each other, recognized each other, as Joel was saying, and that actually did make a fundamental difference. So they did in Oslo. They did recognize each other, and that opened an enormous range of practical possibilities.
I tried. You know, first of all, just I want to say on the quartet, just a word, and then make my point that the quartet wasn't a structure. It was a smokescreen. And so, you know, to try and even look at it to see whether it's unfair, because it was used, I mean, it was a pure smokescreen. I can explain that if anybody wants. But my larger point is, I guess we're all sort of coming down on you, Emmanuel, and I will too. There are structures that you're talking about about identity, accepting the story of the other, going first, all these things that are embedded in particular structures. And in weighting these structures, I would say they're this big, and the other structures, like what's happening in the United States and what the President of the United States is doing, and Iraq, the emergence of Iran, are this big. And they overwhelm those. So that if we begin, while what you're saying is not wrong, it may be irrelevant. That may not be the place. And this gets back to Tom's very, very first comment, which is this an Arab-Israeli conflict or a Palestinian-Israeli conflict? Well, it's a Palestinian-Israeli conflict, as you said at the end of the time. That's what we said for the first 3-4 hours that we're talking about. But if we're going to begin to talk about getting this back on track, I don't think the parties are the place to look. The place to look is at these bigger structures that are strongly pushing Sunni powers like Saudi Arabia and Egypt to find a way to find common cause with Israel, given the emergence of Iran, given what's happened in Iraq. What Patrick Seal called in a different context the struggle for Syria, which is critical here, and whether in fact the United States is going to play the role to within that structure to push the parties to say, you know what, you're going to get together, you're going to sit down, and you're going to start moving towards a solution. The dramatic move is not Sadat this time. The dramatic move is by the President of the United States. Now, I think it is structurally impossible, given the situation in the United States, for a first-term president to do this. The lesson is too clear. Any first-term president who has done this has never had a second term, right? The Carter and the first Bush. So, and we're in the second term of a president who is incapable of doing this, nor is very interested in doing it, even though Secretary of State sort of makes some noises. So the question is, so we're looking, so this is bleak. But what the question is, if a first-term president in 2008 is going to lay the groundwork for it to happen in 2013. All right, we're years away, but you know, this is a long conflict, and that really has to be the focus. It seems to me that's where the initiatives, the first step, and the important steps can be taken.
Let me be very open, because in fact what I'm here doing is because I want to hear your suggestions and your ideas. In fact, I'm putting on the table two ideas that seem to be the opposite of each other. One is the idea, you know, and Tom was talking before, well, we haven't heard much about the Arab-Israeli conflict. We talked mainly about us Palestinians, Israelis. And what I'm putting here on the table is, on the one hand, is the idea about self-change, is the idea about constructing on, that point, that focal point, constructing it, and that it has to do with identity. But the other idea that I put, and I mentioned when I read my sort of agenda at the beginning, it is this concept that I call diffusing, which is really changing dramatically, with a lot of drama, the rules of the game at that level that you are talking about. And I see, if we get to the nitty-gritty, I think there may be an opportunity right now because of Iran, not in spite of Iran. Things are happening. Things are happening. It's nuclear weapons. It's a kind of threat that Israel has not felt yet. The kind of things that Israelis may be persuaded because of that it had never happened before. It is structures that even a president like Bush, I'm not saying that it will be Bush, but even in a first term, may have to come to terms with that because of the structure of the situation. That's what I meant before by having a grand post-war settlement without the war, which is exactly how you described it. And this goes to what I said before, that one is bottom up and the other is top down. I think both are important. I still don't know how to put them together. This is why I put it on the table. I first wanted your reactions on the question of change, of self-change, and who needs to go first. But I don't disagree with what you said. John, then Tom, and Janice. John, sorry, I keep saying.
Well, I suspect Joel may be right, but I still try to answer Michael's question. But I'll take my cue not from game theory, but from psychology. So there are two questions: who moves first, and what is the first move of the first mover? I'll assume that Israel goes first without further discussion. Now, the first move I suggest is the following: offer the Palestinians something they haven't asked for, or offer them more than they asked for. That could not possibly be seen as a concession, and therefore as a sign of weakness. Now, what that offer should be, I don't know. But from psychology, it seems that works.
Does work.
Yeah,
Does
that's a very important point. Thank you.
Does.
Yeah, I don't know either.
That's worth thinking about.
No, but
That's worth thinking about. You're absolutely right. It would not signal weakness. You're absolutely right. That would not signal weakness, the way you've structured it.
Tell this to the Israelis.
Tom?
Yeah, I get the impression that we are assuming there could be a solution, and the problem is how do you get there?
Right.
Who moves first and all of that, and what kind of a move it should be. When I used to study negotiation, I came to the conclusion that usually complicated issues were resolved when the outcome became obvious. And everybody knew what the outcome was going to be. That sort of gave rise to my concept of a focal point, which I used to write about. I would like to propose two hypothetical research agendas. Hypothetical research agendas. One would be to gather a group of Israelis and Palestinians, and maybe Saudi Arabians and Americans, some from officialdom, some from academia. Divide them into two groups. One group is told, assume there could be a solution and it will eventually be reached. We want you to try to predict what that solution will be, and the person whose prediction is closest to the outcome will get $1 million of Mr. Bronfman's money.
It's a good thing he's not here.
The other is slightly different.
He would probably put that up, too.
I'd like to try to persuade him it'd be a good use of $1 million. The other one is a little more like a focal point issue. It would be, imagine a solution and describe it. And all those solutions that are nearly alike, whether you believe in them or not, you're not trying to predict, you're simply trying to write a solution that is as close as possible to what other people will write. And those that are closest together as judged by a panel will each get $1 million of Mr. Bronfman's money. And then I would look at what both of those experiments produced, and especially if they matched, I would say we now know what the solution will be if it ever comes about. In fact, we now know that everybody deep in his own mind already has a pretty good idea of what the only possible solution is going to be. And if that can become recognized and acknowledged, then probably, once everybody knows what the outcome is going to be, it's not going to be hard to get a first move. Because once it's clear where it ends, I don't think it matters who has to go first.
Thank you. Yazid, and then Janice?
Yeah.
Oh, you have a one or a two?
He has a two.
Well, no. If it's a follow-up, then okay, please, yes.
Well, while you were speaking, Tom, you got me thinking of the refugee issue, specifically on the Palestinian side, as a very good example of, in fact, both when Jon said something about offering more than is expected, and then what you were saying about when the outcome is known. And I think, there's a lot of sense to both ideas, but the refugee problem is a nice, not so nice case of, or example of how it can work the wrong way. Well, for instance, Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, Palestinian president, has in fact quite often and quite publicly spoken to refugee audiences and said, I'm not going to lie to you. In my view, there is no return. Full stop. Let's get it out of your heads. He told this to a refugee audience in Damascus a couple of years ago. He was visiting. And he was really blunt about it. Now, that's an example, I think, both of, that's something that I know various Palestinian Track 2 negotiators, really senior ones, Abu Ala and Dahlan and other people, some in my hearing, would tell their Israeli interlocutors, there is no return. We don't expect return. We're not going to have return. We understand this is part of the deal. Now, there are various dilemmas here. One is, if the Israelis are assured, because after all, you want to assure the Israelis and make them feel secure. This is partly what this is about an existential issue. If the thing is, in making them feel secure enough to go for a deal, you're also basically telling them they don't have to pay you a price.
Right.
You don't have to make a concession. They can take it for granted. And that also, we can see, if you look at the negotiation history, that once the Israelis knew that the Palestinians weren't serious about something like the refugees, they just basically discounted it altogether, rather than say, why don't we make an offer of something that's even more generous from our part as well, like on borders, on territory, on withdrawing settlements, or whatever. It's just for me an example that brings out these dynamics. It could work that way. At the same time, it produces huge dilemmas. And although it's known as part of the outcome, and someone like Abu Mazen has come out and said, look, we all know this is the deal, this is the outcome, let's stop messing around and hanging ourselves on this hook. Why don't we proceed? Yet for some reason, it doesn't work. So I'd be interested to see how it still doesn't connect here to there.
Let me add to Yazid's point and put two more concepts on the table, which Tom has written about, and use them to disagree with Joel in terms of the structural level, all right? The first is the infinite regress of expectations. To the extent that you see, or Israel's leadership sees an opportunity in the broader environment because there are shifts, Palestinians read that same opportunity and read it differently, as Yazid said. So one side has an incentive to move, the other side has an incentive to wait. When the situation reverses itself, and we can imagine this infinitely, the second side has an incentive to move, the first side has an incentive to wait. So what we have to understand is both sides are reading that environment, the broader environment. And therein lies a trap, it seems to me. It's one of the social traps that Emmanuel was talking about. The second, the second one that we actually haven't talked about, but which Yazid has just alluded to in response to Tom, is outbidding among constituencies. There is an argument to be made, given the politics in both Palestine and Israel, that no matter what offer is put on the table, and you just alluded to it between the two, but there's a within problem as well, you will have significant constituencies that will outbid and devalidate, right? So that leads me to a third issue that Tom has written about too, and we haven't talked about it at all, are tacit bargains. Because that's what the focal point really was. There was never any formal negotiation. There was nothing on the table to react to. And yet you converge through a process of tacit bargaining on the focal point. That's how you got to the clock in Grand Central Station. You never put anything on the table to talk about. So if we take those two parts of Tom's argument and we say, we know what the solution is, more or less, is there an opportunity for tacit moves, tacit bargaining, which breaks through some of those destructive dynamics, some of the traps, and moves us closer to that clock? And having been in umpteen track 2 processes, that discussion never gets very far down the road, right? There's almost a resistance that comes back every time you try to talk about tacit bargaining. So that may be something that might be worth thinking about. Tom.
Edna, then would you like to respond?
I'll wait a while.
Okay,
It was
Edna, please.
the risk of being obtuse or being perceived as obtuse. I'm not sure whether they the two previous responses asked Tom what I want to ask Tom. In some serious sense, I think my starting point was that maybe we've reached that solution that got Bronfman's prize. Nobody got $1 million, but basically, I think we are there.
Put up your hand.
And it has, did you get the money?
You're moving
I
first
think-
on this one.
Basically, both, the solution, I mean, both of the groups, the experiments that you described to us, I think that we know now what the outcome is. It's on the table. And yet, the question of who moves first or what is the process is still very much with us. I mean, the fact that we may already know what the two groups come up with does not already get us there.
But now we're presupposing common knowledge.
Is that what stands in the way?
Well, you're presupposing that in what you just said. And in a paper, you raised the issue, which I think we should talk more about.
My comment was simply going to be, I think you're right, but it isn't common knowledge.
So that's
It can't be acknowledged.
so that's what
What I would like is a demonstration that all around the world, on both sides of the 67 borders, on both sides of the Persian Gulf, and on both sides of the Atlantic, everybody, or most people, have a pretty good idea of what has to be the nature of a solution. And if that can be made sufficiently obvious, if we had a world leader, sort of a Dag Hammarskjöld or somebody who was hugely respected, and he took it upon himself to spend a year talking to people and finally said, I now know what the solution is going to be. I've talked to Palestinians and Iranians and Saudi Arabs and Egyptians and Americans and ultra-Orthodox Jews and secular Jews and all kinds of people. And I know that deep in their own minds, they all recognize what the solution is going to be, and here it is, and I will tell you. That might get the kind of attention that would allow people to say, sure, we don't need to make a first move. Let's all just nod our heads and agree.
By virtue of that announcement, it becomes common knowledge.
I would hope so.
My fear is that when that happens, everyone sits up and they say, wow, that makes so much sense. And then they immediately go and do the opposite.
Right.
Let us talk about common knowledge, to follow your suggestion for a little while, but also then let's talk somewhat, the time is running, to talk about reframing. Maybe you, Janice, want to say something,
No, I'm
okay.
good.
All right, so let's, please, yes.
Sorry, I thought you were...
No, I'm in fact, I'm in fact putting a common knowledge on the table and expecting someone to pick it up, as it were. Sari? Jon, would you like to maybe be more specific and then maybe
Well,
provoke?
it's a pity that Danny isn't here, because I think he and Amos wrote a very interesting chapter in an edited volume some 10 years ago called Barriers to Conflict Resolution, something like that, where he also points to a kind of contamination effect from the very fact that the other side makes a certain proposal. You infer that it's really manipulation. It's tainted at the source, and that. So even if each side believes that the 67 borders is the solution. The fact that the other side proposes it contaminates it. And so it's, but if Hammarskjöld announced it, then everybody would knew that everybody knew it, and it wouldn't have be contaminated at the source.
Yes, please.
About common knowledge. There was this saying, I think, by Abba Ibn. He defined an Israeli consensus as something that they all say together, no one believes in private. So one of the things is that about common knowledge is, it's not that on individual basis, you know that, they know that, you know that. The point is, what is the story they tell collectively? And that's maybe very different from what they believe individually. And in order to get a consensus, let's call it an Abba Ibn consensus, that's something which is on the way. It's not just let it be known on all the sort of, I don't know, Uman's all, I don't know, infinite set of, I don't believe, above 3 you don't need, above 2 I don't believe that you need more than 2. But basically I believe that the issue of common knowledge is that what is the story that those two communities tell together about what they believe that others believe and so on, which is not the individual, it's not on a retail basis, it's on a wholesale basis.
What Agisha describes is called by psychologists pluralistic ignorance, where, to put it crudely, nobody believes that P, but everybody believes that everybody else believes that P. And that can be a very stable situation, just the emperor's new clothes, basically. But it can unravel like that. That's why I think it's a very fragile basis for a stable solution. We know what happened to the emperor's new clothes.
Anybody would, yeah, go ahead.
Well, also I wanted just to respond to what Jens was saying. And I don't think.
Put it on.
Yep.
I can't hear you.
You might.
I don't think the point is that there is a structural situation out there that is read differently by Israelis and Palestinians, because I don't think their reading matters that much. I think it is the reading of the U.S. Yeah, I think I'm right. And beyond that, I would say it has to be the United States and not Dag Hammarskjöld. First of all, Dag Hammarskjöld is dead, but even if Dag Hammarskjöld were alive, and he said that, and went around for a year, talked to all these people, came out and said it, the first thing, what would the reaction be in Israel? Anti-Semite. He's an anti-Semite, right? This is what they've said almost about every single UN. About Dag Hammarskjöld himself and every successor he's had. They're all anti-Semites.
They were all right. They were just not married.
So now, I do think that the war this past summer was a big setback to common knowledge. Because prior to that war, the settlers were becoming resigned to a movement towards, if not the Six-Day Border, something. This was coming. Olmert had run on this unilateral withdrawal from the West Bank to be following what had happened in Gaza. And now there's a revival of spirit that there's still another solution out there. And this is a very big setback, and it's a real shame, I think, because it'll take time to revive that common knowledge.
Can I?
Just a quick two-finger, and it's probably worth putting on the table at some point. I think the role of the United States is wildly over-exaggerated, both in terms of what it can do and in terms of what it can't do. We should be beyond that when we look at the United States in Iraq we should be disabused of this myth that the United States is the driver of this process. If you look at the origins of Oslo, to go back to just 1 second, it was done around the United States. It's an externalization of the problem outside the region in ways that I actually think are debilitating. So I profoundly disagree with that way of looking at this part of the world. I really do.
Mike.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Like many of you, I've sort of had this impression that there is common knowledge with respect to what the solution looks like, and I'm intrigued that we have to may go through some kind of process for all to recognize, once again, the common knowledge. But something that Joel said actually resonated with me, which was that is that prior to the Lebanon war of this last summer, I assumed that there was a solution out there, and it was like we've all described. And then the Lebanon war for me was kind of a wake-up call. And I haven't actually really ever slept well since then. And the reason why is because I become increasingly convinced, this was partly why I wrote the memo the way I did, is that we're drifting past that possible solution. And so what might have been common knowledge about this is a solution, yet the ability to capitalize on it is, I think, increasingly unlikely. Now, that's why I think, and so that forces me in that context to imagine what would life be like if, in fact, that solution that we all think is now common knowledge is no longer obtainable? And that's the reason why I then sort of ask, is that what we need? Do we need that kind of shock? Do we need that kind of staring right really into the gallows? That's that kind of mutual national suicide that I talk about, in which it sort of forces you then to reframe, to think of yourself now as confronting a whole new situation. And so maybe the problem is not that we need to get to common knowledge and recognize it. Maybe we have to become more aware that, in fact, we had that solution and it's now drifting past us. And we now need to confront alternative scenarios if, in fact, we're going to go back and retrieve what we all think of as that possible outcome.
Yes.
What happens if the Palestinian National Unity Government holds, Hamas miraculously signs on to the 3 international conditions? What happens the day after? I mean, I can't remember if I made the same point in this workshop earlier or I made it to someone else 2 days ago in Utah, I think. I'm getting jet lagged. But what happens the day after? I mean, what's on offer? The roadmap, at best. All right? So, and as I said earlier, I mean, I take Joel's point entirely about the quartet and the roadmap, and I agree with it. But nonetheless, at least nominally, if, in this case, the US, the EU, whoever, people with bucks and all the rest of it, were actually to come along and genuinely underwrite the roadmap and implementation and provide some basic sort of impetus there, maybe, you know, but I don't see that happening for all sorts of reasons, partly because of the nature of the Bush administration, because of this, that, and the other. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, in other words, there are, I mean, even if the Palestinians who are falling apart, the Palestinian authorities on collapse, it's a dysfunctional system. We're sort of in a way discussing all this as if there are, you know, there's sort of institutional actors on both sides that are equally coherent to the point that, you know, states are these days. That doesn't apply to the Palestinian case anyway, at best, and nowadays it doesn't apply at all, really. There's a fundamental breakdown in sort of systemic process. And yet, even if all that were to be suspended and we were to move to the day after, do we then have the prospect of sufficient interventions, whether they're really principal, as Joel argues, or they're less so, as Janice argues, in the case of the US, but nonetheless, if all actors start acting, is there a process with a deal on the table, which is the common knowledge deal we all understand? Is there anyone actually proposing to invest the sort of in political capital to get it rolling the day after? That I don't see, and I think what we'll end up with is Palestinian national unity government, partly through its own faults and flaws, unable to hold indefinitely and falling back and fragmenting again. Because I don't think on the Israeli side, with Olmert, with current public mood in Israel, with all the other things, and the U.S. administration, it's not going to add up. This is my fear.
Just before Avishai, I just want to make a point that, in fact, I forgot who said that one of the problems is that there has been a disjuncture between the two sides being at a point of history that they are ready to make a concession, and that, in fact, the two processes have never met. When the Israelis, for their own reasons, were, let's call it, more readier, maybe the Palestinians were there. And the opposite is the true maybe now. This is what you're alluding. I don't know how that accurate is, but it has been described this way. The other thing that I want to make is the question is then. And it links with learning, reframing, and there was a lot in your memos about that. Let's say that the new Palestinian government holds, and that there may be an expectation of retribution. Where does learning, reframing comes in with such a weak government in Israel that, in fact, if it the question here is not knowing what to do or how to reciprocate, but being completely unable at this stage of time to do it. Avishai.
I think that what Joel said is very important in the sense that the Israelis, in any case, viewed both the shelling of Sderot of Sderot in the south and the Hezbollah in the north as an attack on the Green Line. The Green Line was actually the consensus, if anything is consensual in Israel. And the idea that, there are lots of explanation, why Palestinians or why the Islamic Jihad did it, but whatever the reason, the Israeli perception is that even on the left, center left, those who advocated the peace of the Oslo Agreement people, they suddenly felt that the Green Line is under attack. And they lost actually their grip on politics the minute the Green Line was under attack. In that sense, it will take time to heal the effect of what happened in Lebanon and in the south, which is still going on. Now, what I think is the procedural thing is the following. I still believe that the only serious thing on the table is the Saudi-Egyptian, which is the Arab, basically, proposal. But this time, because of what happened, it should be backed by someone more serious. And the first move, I think, should be, you, the Israelis, go to negotiate with the whole Arab world. And we, the quartet, promise you, or not the quartet, it's West Europe and United States, that if you go there and sign an agreement, you join NATO and be defended by NATO if from the Iranians, from others. So basically joining NATO is one thing that we can promise you, and a preferential arrangement with the EU economically. I think that these two things are sellable and can change the dynamics in Israel, in any case. A government that will go to election, and that will go to negotiations with a promise of a serious solution to the defense and an economic prospect, I think can do something. So the first, if you ask me, what I still believe the mechanism is the Madrid format with the Palestinians there, the national unity government there, discussing the Saudis' plan as the terms of reference, and backed by these two proposals. That's, I think, for me. I won't bank on it, but I think that it's not utterly unrealistic.
Let me just say a very, very short anecdote that last month I published in the Jerusalem Post an article that made that proposal about NATO. I had 200 hate mails, those that are attached to the...
Which means that you are in business.
The talkbacks.
The talkbacks, they insulted my mother, Bronfman's mother, and everybody else. I mean, it was never...
Yeah, but that's ultra-right.
No, Israelis?
Israelis.
No, it's
Israelis. I just wanted to make that.
No, it's not. I mean, saying it's Israelis doesn't tell the story. I can tell you something about those who wrote to you.
Okay, Jan.
Sure.
There's a difficult issue about what are political constraints, what is politically impossible. Because often, of course, actors will say that something is politically impossible. How do we know? I think that what Abishai and Emmanuel have proposed is politically impossible. I cannot see Israel give up an ounce of its sovereignty over its own defense forces. I just cannot see it. But I might be wrong.
If I may, well, I don't think this is the kind of that the direction we need to take. But just let me say in one word is that what I have in mind is not given the constraints of yesterday, but given the constraints of tomorrow. I'm taking into account Iran with nuclear weapons, a new kind of threat to Israel that Israel has not faced yet. And in fact, although Avishai did not say, it's a kind of new quid pro quo. That is that if Israel will want, and Israel wants the United States and the world to help her with Iran and nuclear weapons, etc., it will not come without a price. And it is a big quid pro quo, and this is the nature of the,
It was the dream of Ben Gurion, actually, to join that. And Ben Gurion was a sort of, sovereignty was for him a serious thing. But I think, yes, my hunch is that they will go for it. Sorry.
It is, sorry. It is 7 minutes to 3, and I would like still, if someone would be interested and ready to say a couple of words about two subjects. One is the subject of learning, framing, reflection, because this has come out a lot in your thank you, Jan. See you later. In your memos, and the second one is the practical one. That is, we have talked here and there, and this is a good example of a practical thing to do and how to go. But the question is how to bridge between the halls of high knowledge and the halls of government, and this will make, I think, a very natural bridge in order to get us talking about the future of these projects. So is there around the table anything that you would still think interesting or important to say about the question of learning, whether learning is possible? Sorry, I could, in terms of your very vast experience, and also with the experience with Nusayba alone, I mean, can you say something about the possibility of learning in this process to maybe take us to this common focal point, or your Archimedean?
I'm not sure. I mean, I can say one or two things about it, I suppose. I'll try. But since I was asked to talk, maybe I'll just comment.
Please do.
First, very quickly on Avishai's proposal about Saudi Arabia. Just something that suddenly got terrified me, which was to give a country like Saudi Arabia the legitimacy of leading into the whole region into a new phase, the Arab world into a new phase, has, I think, will have important implications on the nature of the societies that will evolve afterwards, and we have to take that into account, because, I don't certainly want a state that will be, a replica of a Wahhabi state in the future. But the other thing, now, the other comment I want to make is that going with what Mike was saying, I think that although at one stage, and certainly up till very recently, perhaps even till this minute in time, everybody realizes deep down, I think, what a solution would look like at this moment. Nonetheless, I think there's a growing realization on the part of everybody concerned who know what a possible solution would look like, a growing realization that actually this solution is becoming, is fading out, is losing, and people are taking new postures and positions in this regard. Some people are going, in one direction, some in another. And the Islamicization that we witness in Palestinian society is partly, I think, a reflection of this, an instance of this, this kind of receding from, coiling back from what was looked upon as a common knowledge solution. But now, which leads me to a comment about bottom-up and top-down. And I was going to say that, in a sense, my own view is that sometimes, like I thought at one stage, a few years ago, that the leaderships on both sides were so useless, and that the United States was even more so, that it stood to reason that only the Israelis and the Palestinians themselves would pick up the mantle and do something about it. And that's why I was involved at the time in this. And I think it was true, and I think, various steps were made, and it was necessary to make them. By the way, to go back to Abu Mazen and the refugee issue, this is an anecdote, right? So, but it's okay, I hope. Yeah. One of my major problems about refugee statements was with Abu Mazen in a meeting of the leadership. He sort of came in and stood up and said, you should stop saying these things and so on. And very strangely, at that time, Arafat was silent about it. We were in a meeting and he turned to Arafat for support against me. And Arafat didn't support him. And so, people understood, therefore, who were sitting around the table, that I could go on saying what I wanted in this kind of context, which was a strange kind of thing. But one of the things Abu Mazen said in the discussion, I was making statements about the right of return, that people should forget about. And Abu Mazen was saying, let me be clear about this. At the time, two things. First of all, I shouldn't be making such statements. And secondly, that in public. And secondly, that in any case, it's not a positive thing. I mean, we lose a bargaining chip by my making those statements. Now, but the point was, and this is what I said at the table, that of course, everybody knew in Palestine, the refugees who were being addressed and the refugees that were not being addressed, that in fact our leadership, let's just say Abu Mazen, Abu Ala, Abu all of the Abus, were in fact telling their Israeli counterparts exactly that, but they were not revealing this to the refugees themselves, to the refugee constituencies. Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, it was in a refugee camp in Deshe, as called once, summoned by some activists at the time when they were still, with guns. And I was told, we had a long conversation, maybe 2, 3 hours. I didn't know that I was going to come out of this again alive. I mean, when I was asked to go, it was in the evening. I was terrified, but I felt I had to go. And at the end of the discussion, they told me, these people, we want to tell you the following, they said to me. First of all, we disagree with you. Secondly, we dislike what you are telling us and what we hear from you. But finally, we'd like to tell you that we really do respect you. And we respect you, they told me, we respect you because we know from our own sources, and they have good sources, that our leaders are saying this to the Israeli leaders. So the only people that are left in the dark about our intentions are who? Are the Israeli public and our refugee constituency, but the Israeli public. So in fact, Sharon could in fact market us, the Palestinians, to the Israeli public as people who are not really committed to peace, just because we are not able publicly to stand up and say what we intend and what we tell the Israeli leaders we are prepared to do, namely that we're prepared to not have the refugees returned to within Israel. But maybe very quickly, finally, I want to say this, that it does make a lot of difference sometimes to try and people are prepared, I think, to learn and to transform and to come on board with new ideas and so on. And, the Palestinians, in my own experience, have been as suicidal in politics as in blowing themselves up. I mean, people have been very forthcoming on both fronts. But at this particular juncture, I would say that the bottom-up approach seems to have become defunct as a why? Well, things have scattered. People have lost any kind of faith in the possibility of the solution. It's no longer regarded as a solution that's possible. A lot of people don't even consider that from people are also disaffected with our own with ourselves, with our own leadership. Many people aren't really interested in us ruling ourselves anymore. We have a problem of values. We have a conflict in what it is that we really want. I mean, what we want a state for. And, yes, there are some of us still, thousands maybe, who wish to be ministers and have Mercedes cars and wear suits but the majority who are not involved in the leadership really just wish to have normal, decent, dignified lives, which is why we wanted a state in the first place. And since we do not have the sense from the experience of our own self-rule, so to speak, so far that this is what we are providing ourselves with. So we are disaffected also with that. So there's this disaffection as well running in people's minds. Which is why, finally, I want to say that, so today, if at this juncture something will work, I think more likely a top-down approach is the only one that is possible. And in this connection, I'd say a top-down approach, I'd go with what Joel was saying, the United States to take a lead at this particular point. Maybe it can use the Saudi plan and put it on the table and say, look, this is what needs to be done. But unless that happens, I think, we're likely to fade into the scenarios that Mike outlined in his memo with very, dim consequences all around.
And if I may ask, do these scenarios don't scare? I mean, because there is a question of fear, and then moving, reframing for both communities the problem as a problem of loss, the kind of loss that Michael is talking about. So in what you are saying, this is not enough. That is, this kind of fear that Israelis, Palestinians will pay dearly, that the cost is going to be, that this is, watching suicide, like he called, that will not do the work. I mean, I'm asking whether this...
There's You know, when the army, Israeli army went into Jenin recently, 2 years ago, whenever it was, the story since then has been in the Palestinian, among Palestinians. And this is actually giving people another angle to everything to do with 48 and 47, that the things have changed, that come what may, people will stay. Whatever happens, unlike what happened in the past when they picked up and left. So there's no fear in that sense. Palestinians, I have to tell you something. I mean, I think the Palestinians do not have fear in the normal sense of the word. I don't know whether I make any sense.
I forget who it was who said on that side of the table that there is a time mismatch, that I think, Yazid, that when one party is ready for concessions, Emmanuel, okay, and it came up lack of synchronization, that when one party is ready for some kind of concession, the other one isn't. I want to take this as a cue to go back to the question of under what description, or what is the way we tell the story. I think that it's extremely important here, because what Israelis see as a concession that maybe we are finally ready to make is not perceived as a concession by the other side. And it seems to the other side as what's obviously their due, and that they see it as an insult that Israelis perceive, even put it on the table as a concession, and vice versa. And I will just mention the story of Barak's going back from Lebanon. I won't even say retreat from Lebanon, but because even to say retreat is already framing it. And how is that event described by the Israelis, and how it is described by the Palestinians is a completely different story. The Israelis see it as both a concession and an act out of strength, and being sovereigns of our own fate, and a unilateral thing that comes from strength. The Palestinians see it completely differently, especially the Hezbollah, the way they tell it to their own people. So question of description and aligning descriptions and aligning stories seems to me a particularly important one. And I want to tie this with what now Sari said, that maybe the only hope is top-down approach. If it's top-down approach, the way I understand it, it comes from the leadership, right? It comes from the leaders, and it all depends very, very much now on the way the leaders frame the situation to the people, the way they describe what they intend to do, how they perceive what they intend to do, and whether they can come to some kind of understanding with the other side how the situation is described. Because otherwise, again, what one leadership tells its own people as a grand concession or a gesture, if it's not reciprocated in the way it is perceived, then it gets wasted, and it doesn't get us anywhere.
Just a quick comment and a question for Sari. The quick comment is to Edna, what you're describing, let me come back to it, is common, right? That's usual. That what one side perceives.
It's a problem.
Yeah, no, but it's ubiquitous, right? So it doesn't help us, because, let me rephrase the question, despite this being ubiquitous in every single conflict that I know, how do you get a breakthrough?
Right. So
Right.
Maybe ubiquitous, but
It's there.
It needs to be.
Well,
it's critical.
but you actually get the breakthroughs despite it, is what I'm saying. So that's why I changed the question a little bit, because we're looking for the hinges, right? And if you see that in virtually every single major enduring conflict, and it persists, what happens is the breakthrough changes the story. You don't change the story first. The breakthrough changes the story. Let me come back to Terry for one. If you actually look at how that started, the Lebanon, because it's very interesting, actually. What actually started that process going down the track? Yes, there were casualties, right, in Israel, but that wasn't sufficient. You actually got some domestic mobilization. some highly effective, very visible mobilization, Israeli mothers, right? And it was an importation from what was going on in Latin American societies. It was very effective visually, and it actually changed the fulcrum inside the country. I come back to others. When you 3 years ago, started what was effectively a mass effort, right? And it was very deliberately designed to go around elites that you thought were blocked. And the conditions at that time were favorable in your view. So I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about then. Why didn't you succeed in your view? Where was the blockage? Because in the history of the conflict, these coordinated attempts are rare. And your diagnosis was that the conditions, there was an opening. So why did you think now, looking back, why do you think it didn't succeed?
Well, I still have to, to decide in my mind exactly what made it not succeed. But one of the things that happened, which made it pointless, was not in a negative sense,
right,
was the election of Abu Mazen on the Palestinian side. Because as far as we were concerned on the Palestinian side, and I'm talking about ordinary people, in the earlier period, what we were trying to do was to try and get around the leaderships.
right.
But with the election of the new leader, representing, as he did to everybody, embodying the peace option, the ordinary person on the street felt, well, I've done my duty now. I've given my vote. Now he needs to do his. So the people somehow gave away the power, which at one stage they had. They've done this. This happened with us more than once, by the way, that the people had the power. I mean, the first Intifada was a good example, when the people had the power. And at one stage they gave it up. And with the beginning of Oslo and the PLO and so on, again, they gave it up. So whenever there's a government, I think, people naturally tend to give the power up to their leadership, thinking so that's one I think, reason. Another reason, of course, is that my colleague on the Israeli side decided to go into politics, and thinking that this would be a better way to influence situations in Israel. Maybe he was right. Edna was telling me earlier he has no chance of doing this, but perhaps she is wrong, and he may have. So the third thing maybe I want to say is that we did not have the support that I thought would be there in the international community, which was strange. I mean, to me, that people like the European Union, the American, the U.S. administration, and so on, when I thought they would grab something like this, being a grassroots movement for the first time and support it, I saw all of them going in different directions, and it was strange. And so there was no support, not financial, not moral, not political.
Thank you. Joel? Just first, Edna, I think when we were talking about top-down, we weren't talking about the Palestinian and Israeli leadership top-down. We were talking about internationally top-down. So it's a little different. Okay, so I want to continue picking this fight with Janice here. It seems to me that the one glimmer of hope that remains at this moment lies, oddly enough, in the Iraq study group. Because the Iraq study group really offers, I think you're right, Janice, that given the U.S. in Iraq and what's happened, it's has no capital left. But if it should adopt a kind of Iraq study group strategy, which is a multilateral regional strategy involving sort of recognizing the Iranian, Iranian power in the Middle East, engaging it as an adversary, trying to create a coalition to offset it in a kind of balance of power sense that would include the Saudis, include the Egyptians and Jordanians, that it would, and involve all of those in a kind of Iraqi endgame. That then it would, there is an important logic then to push on the Palestinian-Israeli issue. And not from what Jews reacted to that Iraq study group en masse practically, which was, oh, they think we're responsible, if they solve the Palestinian-Israeli thing, then everything else will go away and the Islamic world will love us, and that's a mistake, and therefore they shouldn't push on Palestinian-Israeli thing. No, not at all. That the Palestinian-Israeli solution will open up possibilities for a balance of power in the Middle East, including Israel, facing Iran, that would benefit Israel as well as those Sunni countries which are worried about, kind of Shiism, the rise of Shiism, worried about Islamic militant activity and everything else. And this puts the United States in a very, very different kind of role from the role that it's playing in Iraq. So to me, that is the structural change. And it's one that's actually within the grasp of United States leadership. And then, a lot of other things have to happen. I mean, a lot of, the Israeli and Palestinian leadership are then going to be pushed and bruised and, not always going in, as in Madrid, and there's going to have to be follow-up. But I think that that's the glimmer of hope that exists.
Let me just say that it's 3:15, and that in fact we would like to continue maybe this conversation and finish after, and then we should move to the last section of our short workshop and talk about the future. And what I thought is the following. One option is say, well, it was nice, we discussed, we had, it's a nice group, we get along very well, nice ideas, but, that's it. Maybe there is no more, there is very little more to get out of it. A second option, obviously, not only because I was predisposed from the beginning, but also because of what is my own judgment of our discussions, I feel encouraged to go to next steps. And the obvious first step, or let me put it, the classical first step would be just to have, a second conference with papers, that is real papers, with a publisher waiting in the wings. And in fact, I have talked to Cambridge University Press. They want it yesterday. They are ready to get a book like that with you people and Rationality, the Middle East conflict. They will take it. But I want to put two other things on the table. And they are not mutually exclusive. One is to continue with the workshop. And this time to do the workshop at the premises. That is, to do it in Jerusalem with a wider participation of Palestinians and Israelis. Also some practitioners, if possible. This will require time, preparation, in which, will be the core. We will have heard some suggestions. Jon said, if you're interested, I can try. He's my friend. I can bring Larson again into the process, or
Not Doug Hammarskjöld.
not Doug Hammarskjöld.
Beyond his ability.
Yeah,
Uh,
can't do that.
Even Jon can.
Even your.
No,
I didn't say Hammarskjöld.
no, I said.
Oh, you said it. Okay. But the thing would be to have some kind of then cooperation, maybe with the Center of Rationality that Edna heads at the Hebrew University, and if Sari is willing to participate also with Al-Quds University, we'll have, we'll do a triangle, and we'll continue. Not, we may talk whether we should come with papers. We will enlarge our memos into some papers, but still do it in a workshop sense, not just to have papers, give papers, have discussants, but to have a discussion so practitioners and other Palestinians and Israelis can listen about the combination of issues, of very theoretical issues about rationality, about irrationality, and the practical issues of getting the process moving. As I said, these two venues are not mutually exclusive. But I had a third idea, which again, it's not entirely mutually exclusive with the other, that has to do somewhat with what Tom was talking yesterday in his excellent rationality talk, which has to do with education. And we were talking also in the taxi when we were driving to the hotel with Jon about educating that although in some sense these things are natural, but when we think about rationality, etc., but there is a need of educating about this issue. So I also thought, again, and this will require an extra step in formalizing and institutionalizing, is also maybe in parallel too, if we manage to continue with the workshop and then end up with maybe a book that we'll publish together, is think about the possibility of some institutionalized cooperation in which we will create common courses that some of us may teach together, combining our different disciplines and points of view, in which we will talk about rationality, psychological problems, problems of framing, for example, etc., and we'll teach. We'll try to create, and maybe also, with some kind of curriculum, and some workshops with graduate students and researchers. So this is something I put on the table. Tom, half an hour ago, put another couple of ideas which have $2 million prize at the end. Unfortunately, I cannot put a $2 million incentive into my ideas, but all I can say, and this is probably Janice will be able to say more than us. We probably will need to get some more help, but I know that I have the backing of the Mann Center for the continuation of this project, whatever you would like to take it. So this is sort of the general. These are the general ideas. Mike?
Just so we're clear, because I thought this was a one-shot deal. And it sounds very exciting. I've actually very much enjoyed today. You also didn't mention the possibility of a special issue of I.O., which I'm sure you could arrange. It need not include, obviously, just simply all of us who've been here, and you probably would want to think about widening the circle to include maybe other people who could write memos or longer briefs or something like that. And there may be some of us who feel like we've said what we can and can't imagine saying anything else. So I guess that would be the first thing I would suggest. The other is, as he said, boy, this is an academic. We have $2 million on the table, and we compromise. We take an edited book. I, I, I wonder whether, I mean, there may be an edited book down the road, but I guess I've been struck more by the nature of our conversations today, in the sense that, for me, there were, I think, two interesting sets of outcomes. One is this question of common knowledge, and Tom's challenge to us and Jan's challenge is does it really exist or not? And I think it's always interesting to have someone from the outside tell all of us who are on the inside that maybe it's not as wide as you think. And I think that's an interesting question. The other is I was actually really quite struck by the fact that when challenged to think about a process, we really couldn't. Outside of maybe the United States will save us.
Right. Right.
That, it went nowhere.
And I had the same sense with the memos.
Okay, yeah, it's just, and I think there is potentially, I think, a value in fact, taking those two pieces and building, I think, a workshop, not so much for academics, but really for the practitioners. And here, I guess, I don't know, I've been struck by various comments that the only thing we've got going for us now is the Saudi plan, is, you can do this in Jerusalem, and you can pull it off. You've got the facilities. It'd be easy to arrange local talent. But boy, wouldn't it be more novel if you went somewhere like Saudi Arabia? No, you may think that's completely crazy.
No, it's just not, you're not going to.
Yeah. Or someplace in which it becomes easier to actually get that kind of profile. So I guess I'm not as taken with the edited book because I have a hard time seeing what it would look like, except unless we take our memos and just simply go where we want, which I don't think is actually really quite helpful. So it would take a lot of structuring. But I also do think that a very carefully formulated workshop that brings together a select number of academics that puts some issues on the table and then turns it over, in essence, to practitioners, to policymakers, could in fact be, I think, worthwhile. I think that would be worth doing.
Thank you, Mike. Is it?
I suppose I've got the sort of more opposite view, negative view, which is, we're all well-meaning and well-intentioned and so on, but that doesn't necessarily produce either very practical new ideas, nor necessarily great scholarship. So maybe, if we're going to approach this as academics who are bringing our academic training and insight to bear on issues, then why don't we do something that is about, exploring the past decade and identifying what went wrong, what really happened in Camp David, or contributions to, revisiting Zartman and ripeness theory, or, hurting stalemates. I don't know. There's a whole range. This is what we do. We're academics. So why don't we do something academic and be straightforward about it? As opposed to coming along with, have we said anything today really that has altered the parameters of what we see as the outcome? I don't think so. Or in terms of process, well, Mike just said we didn't really actually come up with anything procedural or process-based. So I'm not entirely convinced that this is the way to go. And let me put it rather differently. Come June, it'll be 40 years since '67. That's a hell of a long time. And, courses and this and that, it's all right. It's important if I'd like to do that, but I'd like to do that as a teacher who teaches an international relations department, for instance, and wants my students to learn these types of things. But not because I want to resolve the Palestine-Israel conflict. There, the bottom line is simple. It's two states, it's end of occupation, whatever. We want to be political activists, let's go out there and identify what we need to do as political activists. We want to be scholars and academics, then let's do something slightly different. The fact that international humanitarian law developed since 1907 onwards to deal with situations of occupation never envisaged occupation 40 years long. It was designed for something as long as World War II. these are interesting questions for lawyers and international relations and IO people to get into. Let's you know, if that's the case, then let's get into that and do something that's properly academic of that sort. But beyond that, frankly, if this is about helping to push the process forward, then I'd say it's rather simpler. We've got June 1967, June 2007 coming up. It's, I think, a very important moment when we look back and realize that in 40 years we've not been able to move or to stop the backslide. And we want to go act as political activists, let's go do that. But I don't know, I'm just not comfortable with.
I just, if you don't mind, just one quick reaction is that in terms of the compass here, there is a north here, and the north is rationality. I mean, you're right. There are all these kinds of, we can criticize art. I have no desire to do that. My view, my idea was to take rationality because, to me, is so central to understanding why are we stuck, why maybe the problem is there, but we cannot see the way. You know what Michael was saying as his second point. And try to find not the magic bullet or, you know, sort of the magic, with a magic wand to find the solution as in social engineering. But because I think rationality is so much linked, you know, the rationality, irrationality, etc., to sort of the bottom issues. And so our comparative advantage will not be just to talk about, you know, again, the process and 40 years and 67 and all that, but it would be to bring the issues, the political issues, to the level of rationality. And that's where Janice's concept of you know, sort of something to bridge between the high-level understandings of rationality, of common knowledge, and things that are happening next week or will be happening in a year. So rationality is it. Now, if you think that rationality then is, you know, which is a valid argument, then, you know, I'll accept. But I just wanted to remind. Yes, sorry.
Thank you. My sense is this. I mean, I think, you know, Yazid is clearly right that you know, that if one wants, you know, if one wants to solve the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, one needs to do far more than what, you know, is being conceived by us now that we can do. But maybe I want to say something else, actually, and it's a reflection that I've been having over the past maybe year, 2 years, 3 years, which is this, and which this particular session has helped me also think about more. To tell you the truth, I've been, you know, up to about 2-3 years ago, or a year ago, I used to think to myself that I more or less could understand why things happened in very straightforward terms, but also therefore in political terms. I used to think that I knew why things happened the way they did. But I've begun to discover myself over the past year to be totally in the dark. I've become very, not skeptical, but I've come to the point where I have begun to question my knowledge of, so I no longer understand why things are happening, that are happening. You know, I used to feel that I could, and I no longer do. And I think talking about this amongst ourselves, listening to experts like yourselves, may help at least me, and perhaps it can go around a little bit more, help them to articulate to themselves once again why do things happen the way they do. So including specifically this business about rationality, by the way, about which I'm totally, so far, still, unclear, mystified. I don't know what rational is. I don't know, I feel totally lost. And I think discussions might help one articulate to oneself an understanding. So there is a sense in which, at the individual level at least, I feel that I may, in fact, benefit from continued discussion. Now, I realize it will not necessarily help for academic reasons, and it may not help the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it certainly will not change anything about the 40-year, of occupation comes up, and the occupation may never end at all in our lifetime or next lifetime. But in the meantime, maybe by the time one gets to the burial ground, one at least will have a better idea what this whole thing is about.
Avishai.
Let me start with rationality. There are at least 4 senses of rationality. One is rationality as optimality. You optimize some important value, utility, whatever the term is. Then rationality is reasonableness. Then rationality is not being crazy, not mad. And then rational in the sense of humans can act for reason, unlike animals. And I think we vacillated in all the discussions, we vacillate too easily between, forget about animalism, but the 3 senses are intermingled and we vacillate all the time between the. So we are obviously not talking about optimizing anything. And it's either between reasonableness and not being crazy. That's basically, and the point is whether, unlike the theory of rationality of optimizing, when there is a real theory there, not descriptively a very good one, but at least normatively a good one. The rest, there are lots of interesting observation, phenomenology is interesting, but there is no real, there is an oversell there about what we know and what we don't know and how we can shed light on serious things. The phenomenology is important. And so basically you claim that we bring a new angle, namely discussing this conflict. But as it happened, we right away, at least we recurse to our old habits and discuss it in the old terms, the way we, in the last 40 years we discussed. So I'm less sure. I mean, how exactly, actually, the idea is very tempting. There is something seductive about this new angle. But like Sari, actually, I went through the same crisis in the last year, not knowing my way. I don't remember such a situation in my life.
To the club, I heard.
No, it's in a very, no, it's not just an affectatious talk. I mean, really in the most fundamental way, you suddenly live in an area you don't really know the basic moves. You thought you know who's the people, you thought you know a great deal about them, and suddenly you lose a sense of, not reality, but not what counts as a move even. And that's, so if I would have do something, actually, I think that the idea of doing a meeting in an interesting place that will gain some kind of saliency can be interesting in itself. It can be Qatar, it can be there. If Al Jazeera will cover it, it can be even better. So this can be interesting in itself. And then you take it from there. We don't know yet. I mean, I haven't heard something that will change my view about, how to tie rationality with conflict that will present it in a new light. I learned a great deal. People said interesting things. But it's still the old problem, and they're all worried. I mean, they're all worries. Sari challenged me and said, "What, you want to bring Saudi Arabia and the Wahhabis to the game and legitimize this bloody regime?" And which is a serious problem to me. And there are lots of other problems. I mean, we can discuss them. The moral dimension of the conflict are, I mean, for me at least, are very serious problems. At least more, actually, in some sense, as burdensome as the rationalities. I suggest that, I mean, I think that this, I would have second this offer to go to an interesting place and see.
I mean, more interesting than Jerusalem. That's what.
No, Jerusalem is trivial, really. I mean, Jerusalem is just another round of, where the message is the place rather than what exactly you discuss. If you can come up in an interesting location that will in itself suddenly stir things up and get something, that's worth doing.
There is I was asking you, it's in Dubai, the big strategic.
Jonathan Research Center, GRC.
Whose research center?
The Gulf Research Center.
Where's that?
In Dubai. It's based in Dubai, although the founder, chairman of it is Saudi.
And you think it's a possibility they would have taken that?
I don't know, because they'd be tremendously cautious about, they've got other agendas and they wouldn't want to mess them up for something like this. I mean, yeah. I mean, it's always worth trying. They're open to
It's
being.
possible to find out.
Well, I'm on their academic board, and we had a meeting last month in Dubai, and Abdulaziz Sakar, who's the chairman, was telling us actually how he's sort of approached almost once a week by people like, say, the Jerusalem Post, who want to co-publish and do this and that, and he says, we simply can't get into this. So,
Get into this being the Arabic, the Israeli?
open cooperation.
Okay.
I mean, Jerusalem Post wanted an arrangement where they'd publish GRC stuff and so on, and collaborative.
But this would be slightly different.
It would be, but I mean, all I'm saying is that's the sort of sensitivity. So it's, he'd be open to receiving emails, and I'm sure he'd answer them, but you can try, but
Ramallah?
I think it's more, no, but I mean, after all, if it's the Gulf Research Center and they're Gulf focused and they're based in Dubai, I mean, why, they've got.
No, Janice is suggesting doing.
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, I mean, you're more, well, you guys are more knowledgeable. I'm way away in the UK. I haven't been there for a while. I don't know. Oh, Beirut, yes. Oh.
Sorry? It's not difficult, no.
It's just not safe, but.
It's just not safe.
Well, we can do it in Daesh.
So, I really just don't have much to say other than I also felt the same as Avishai. I found this very useful, and I learned a lot, and I appreciated meeting and hearing these people and and getting these ideas talked out. I don't know whether we've done anything new, but I didn't find the rationality framework one that was giving me much leverage here or utility, or as I listened, both in my own trying to come to terms with this, but as I also listened to the rest of the group, it seemed forced, that framework. So I'm just not sure that's working.
Okay.
What is Tom's sense?
Hmm?
Your sense?
I think what happens at meetings like this is that people learn a lot, but mostly they learn from hearing themselves express ideas. And I would think that if you do another, whatever it's going to be, make it last several days so that everybody in the evening can reflect, maybe under the obligation to prepare a 5-minute presentation to get started the next morning, so that everybody has to collect his thoughts and then share them in the morning. because I often find when I leave a place like this, I spend a lot of time thinking what I wish I had said.
Yes.
And if tomorrow ever came, then I could say it tomorrow.
Right.
But instead, I think about it on the airplane going home, and within a month, it's dissipated. I don't remember what it was. So I think making it last over a period of several days so that people can collect their thoughts, restate what they now think they said wrong, clarify what they said unclearly, even ask for help in clarifying their own thoughts. I think that might be a productive way to do it.
Okay. And about the rationality idea itself, as for example, just Joel said, that it may not be the right kind of anchor.
Well, I think what may have happened with me, I'm sure, we'll find out from Yun shortly. When I prepared my lecture, I wasn't thinking about the Arab-Israeli conflict. I wasn't thinking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I was essentially thinking about a lecture on how to think about rationality, what it means and where it applies, and what kind of rational analysis is productive and what kind may be out of place. And it may be that if you could get a Dan Kahneman or a Yun Elster or a Tom Schelling or somebody, not just to give a lecture on rationality, but to explain how any kind of rationality analysis might help people understand either the nature of conflict in general or the specific conflict, that might have helped, because I did not do my homework by preparing a lecture oriented toward the topic of the workshop. I simply went back and collected my thoughts for a 45-minute talk about rationality.
No, and that was at least to me that was great. And if you were not supposed to focus on the Israeli-Arab conflict in those, and I don't know exactly what Jon or Danny will say, but this was supposed to, be just sort of a first try, getting to get our to throw our ideas. If there were some new ideas that would come out, and maybe some focal points could be found around this table, the better. But in a sense, this was an invitation to do what you're just saying. This is an invitation to get you and Jon and Danny and maybe a few others to talk about rationality in the context of the Israeli-Arab, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Arab more generally, and this will be done in a second.
Yeah. I think we all ought to listen to Yun to see whether it's clear that his lecture this afternoon reflects today's discussion.
Okay.
And try to guess whether this is a lecture he was planning to give or whether he's been stimulated by the day's conversation.
Interrupt just for 1 minute while I still have everybody. The first thing we need is this, and Sari wants to, the first thing we need is this speaker release so that the tape can be actually used by students, okay? The second thing is a map, and the little start on it is the hotel. And some of you, it is warmer out, but some of you will still prefer to take a cab. The map is misleading if you're going to go by taxi. It's fine if you're going to go by foot. So why is this? Because, right, it's a one-way street. Exactly. It's east-west, okay? So Yazid got it exactly. So if you're coming by car, you're going to go out of the hotel like this, go up St. George, tell the taxi driver to turn on Prince Arthur, go left on Bedford, come back along Lowther. All right? It's twice as long as the foot flies. The second thing is, I live in a mews, so there are some iron gates where this little, okay, the taxi will drop you off. On the street, you will see a small gate, two big gates. There is a small gate immediately to the right. You walk in that, you go right to the end, and that's where we are. Write down my home phone number in case these directions aren't good enough, which is 416-921-8934. 416-921-8934. If you go by foot, I've drawn the fastest way to get there. It is probably, what do you think, David? A 5 to 7 minute walk from the hotel, that's all. 7, that's about it. All right, and dinner is at 7?
Dinner is at 7, and we are, well, Larry, what?
Well, I realize it's sort of after the event, but just another idea.
Yeah.
So actually, this is latching on to the Qatar and Al Jazeera thing. And I was wondering whether you couldn't, in fact, and I think it would go down very well if you would make an arrangement with Al Jazeera.
We could.
In which, first of all, and they would do this in a series of events, they would have, say, interviews with Tom and others about rationality in general, maybe done here,
Good idea.
to be followed up at some point by their filming a kind of a discussion between all or some of us, specifically answering a simple question like, is there a rational solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? And I think the Al Jazeera would be happy to do it. They would be. We'll have to translate a few terms, okay?
Sorry,
Okay.
we have Al Jazeera in Canada.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So if it can start off with interviews here
Like what?
about rationality in general.
That's
It could
a
start
very
off
good idea.
with people like Tom talking about rationality, rational choice in economics, introducing this to the Arab world.
Mm-hmm.
Because after all, publishing books is, you don't, but talking to the people and explaining, and the talk, by the way, yesterday was I thought very understandable, even by people like me who didn't know anything about the subject. So I think it would go down very well in the Arab world, across the Arab world, and it could be a preliminary step towards then having a specific debate, maybe filmed this time in Qatar itself, if you like, on answering the question on whether it's a rational choice. And maybe at that point, the Gulf Center can come and report what happened and publish it. But Al Jazeera has far more outreach.
Far better.
Yeah.
David, you wanted to?
Well, I just wanted to, this is very much as somebody who's observed with enormous interest what's happened today and felt very privileged to be here. As I think about the discussion and where you go from here, I have to say that one of the things that has struck me is that both Sari and Abishai have said that they actually have lost their intellectual footing. I mean, you don't quite know why things happen the way they happen. That there's been some subterranean shifts in the foundation on which your intellectual appreciation of your situation rests. Well, it seems to me that's, two of you saying that's a very important observation, which actually suggests a potential necessity, which is trying to regain your footing. Do we understand the world that we're living in? We thought we did. We don't think we do now. Why don't we? I mean, that seems to me almost a prelude to be thinking creatively about and afresh about the rational solution to the Middle East crisis. Because implied in this is that you actually don't understand the nature of the issue as you thought you did before. So that, to my mind, as I listened, I'd say, well, that's one area that could quite seriously be developed if your views are other than idiosyncratic.
They're not idiosyncratic.
Well, and the the question, sort of the original question of is there a rational solution to the conflict, as it was said, is as simple as we can get it. Although, as Avishai pointed out, talking about rationality, it's not simple, and there are very different ways of understanding rationality, etc., which in itself is very important. We did not do that because, in fact, that was not the agenda. We didn't want to talk about Habermas and about practical rationality, about this kind of rationality, because there are many forums that they discuss that, but the idea was to discuss. To try to breach again into some veiled idea that we all have about rationality in our heads, and this is why we invited a sort of heterogeneous kind of group, and the Middle East conflict. So we're still building on David. And in fact, on the 2 points that Mike brought forward in his first idea about the workshop, we still can I think that still from that, let's say, simple question about is there a rational solution, a way of approaching the question that David asked. How the world works, what is going on, what changes has happened that we are lost our north, and so that in itself, I think, that would be an important academic contribution to write about. From the perspective of philosophy, from the perspective of economics, political science. But certainly, if it is done together with something like it is suggested here, using Al Jazeera, and then having that element of practicality to get to a larger audience and see whether we can have some effect with that, that I'm all for it, because that was one of the things I put it on the table. But I still think that they are not mutually exclusive. We still, depending if we do this and we are satisfied with it, we still may find that we may have some academic product in the end that may be valuable, whether you want, if it is in your agenda or not, and that's a completely different story. But starting from that question, I think it. You wanted, yeah.
Yeah, no, just to put on record on the table that if the thinking, for whatever reasoning you might have, does go in the direction of Jerusalem, I'm not sure about Sari, but I'd be delighted if Al-Quds can cooperate. But I just want to say that the center at the Hebrew University will certainly cooperate. I mean, This is certainly something that we would be happy doing.
Okay, thank you both. This is something that we will explore also the ways of that to get the interest of the center. So being 4 o'clock and we have Jon's talk in half an hour, we need to rest a little bit. And so
it's next door, right? It's where it was yesterday.
Yeah, it is just over there. Just over there. There are some refreshments.
The lecture at 4:30 by Young. If you go out this door, turn right, go past this red brick building, and you will see a sign immediately to your right that says George Ignatieff Theater. Who, for anybody who's interested, is Michael Ignatieff's father. All right. Okay. So
Thank you. I want to thank you very, very much for attending the workshop. This is still, we are going to keep together. We are going to have dinner at Janice's, and we'll go now to Jon's lecture. And there is, of course, Danny's lecture tomorrow, and the roundtable that Janice is going to handle immediately after. So thank you very, very much for attending and for your very interesting contribution.
Yes, you want my office?